do we have any members in the waiting room by any chance? So Councillor Gallagher, Councillor Dickinson, Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, we are quorate, Chair.
Right.
Now live on YouTube.
Okay. I'll make it 6 o'clock. So I think we'll make a start. I'm sure other members will catch us up if and when they manage to get into to the meeting. I'll just bring the agenda up. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board, Wednesday, the 24th of February. We have 3 items on tonight's agenda, and then the last item is the work plan. Item number 1 is substitutes nominated for the meeting and apologies for absence.
We've no substitutes and no apologies for absence, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just say, I think that Councillor Scullion did send apologies for absence.
Oh, sorry, yes, she did send her apologies. She's nothing that she needs to contribute to tonight.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor.
As cabinet member. Yeah.
Right. Item number 2, members' interest. Do any members have any disclosable pecuniary or any other interest which would prevent them from participating in any discussion on the items or participating in any votes upon the items within this meeting? No. Okay. Item number 3, admission to the public. There, I believe, are no exempt items on tonight's agenda. Okay. Item number 4, minutes of the Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board meeting held on the 9th of December.
That's a correct record, Chair.
Okay. That's carried. Do we have a seconder for that? Right, okay. Councillor Porritt. And just for the record, which I keep forgetting every time, that my signature will be added to them electronically. Okay. Item number 5, the Calderdale elections update. This is an oral report from Ian Hughes, a verbal update which will include what measures are being taken to ensure elections are COVID secure, and what any potential postponements or legislative changes may mean for members and residents in Calderdale. So, Ian, this is over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the latter point. I think it's now clear that the indications from government are that the polling to take place on the 6th of May is with no other factors changing or playing into this to go ahead. There is legislation by way of statutory instrument that is being laid before Parliament to bring about some contribution to the process for trying to make the situation as safe as possible for all those concerned, including members who are looking to stand by reducing the nominations required to stand in the elections for the local elections. Those would normally be 10 per candidate, but that's been reduced to just 2 to avoid members having to, or prospective candidates rather, having to interact with more than just 2 individuals. Obviously, for the first mayoral election that is due to take place again on the 6th of May for the newly created mayoral combined authority for West Yorkshire, the number of nominations for that has also been reduced, and that's down to 10. That's 2 nominations per West Yorkshire district. So there's 5 local authorities within the West Yorkshire district for the mayoral combined authority. and a potential candidate will need just 2 nominations from each of those districts. There remains, and I'm not aware of any change to this just at the moment, but the guidelines on canvassing and leafleting is currently restricted following government guidance on that. Whether that is to be relaxed in any way in the run-up to the election is not clear at this stage, but for the moment, the guidelines that are in place indicate that that there is a requirement that, if at all possible, that doesn't take place. The election itself, then, obviously, there's publicity that has gone out through the various methods available to us, involving direct mailings of the poll cards, etc., where we are encouraging as many voters to register for a postal vote. There is obviously some benefit to be had in minimizing the amount of contact that individuals have through the traditional method of attendance at a polling station. So wherever possible, we would look to ensure that as many people who wish to have a postal vote register in good time for that, and they have been have been notified of the fact that they can do that. We still, however, have to have the polling stations, which we have ensured are booked well in advance. All of the venues have been fully assessed to be as safe as possible, taking into account access and egress and movement through the polling station. And we will have measures in place to ensure that they are as COVID safe as possible. Some venues we've not been able to use in the way that we would ordinarily, but a full assessment has taken place. There's also been the need to reconsider the use of some schools because of the Department for Education's indication that it would encourage and in fact only in exceptional circumstances expect there to be a school being used for a polling station if it meant that school had to close to be used for that purpose. We have, and again, undertaken a very thorough reassessment of those schools that were to be used. We are down to just 7 schools to be used across the district, and of those 7, 5 we know would be holding a training day or an inset day, so the school would have been closed in any event. And we're not quite sure about the other 2, but we are checking on that. So those are the polling stations. Inevitably, therefore, there's then the count that will take place. As usual, that's to be at Northbridge Leisure Centre, where, as you can imagine, we are looking to ensure that the large hall that we traditionally use is also kitted out in a way that provides a safe environment, not only for the count staff, but also for all the candidates and agents who would be entitled to attend that venue. Those measures are constantly being reassessed just to ensure that we can put in place the requisite preventative steps. We are still working through that, so the detail is perhaps not helpful at this stage because it may well change. I would remind all members, though, that there is an all-member briefing that's been given by Robin Tuddenham acting returning officer on Monday next at 5:30. I'll be in attendance at that meeting, as will Michelle Brown, the elections manager, and I'm sure that there'll be more detail that will be provided at that stage. I think one of the themes that we are looking to ensure is understood is that this is an election that will take place, or a series of elections, in fact, because there will be some parish and town council elections as well as the mayoral election, and obviously the local government elections. As much planning as we can possibly do will happen, but we will be, I'm sure, reacting to certain things that develop over the course of the next few months. Obviously, from Monday evening's news, there is a roadmap through to a relaxation of all restrictions come the middle of or 2/3 into June, which does mean that I think there's going to be some expectation that the closer we get to that date, and the 6th of May is closer to that than it is to now, that there'll be, again, a desire to try and make sure things return to as normal as possible. We need to guard against that and ensure that we don't create any situations that contribute to any further spikes in infection rate by bringing people together in a way that isn't safe. So we are doing all that we can to ensure that that's in place, and we'll be ready to react to issues that present themselves in the run-up to the election. Chair, I hope that gives an overview of where we are. Obviously, there's a great deal of planning being undertaken by the team. They are very, very good at what they do, but this is adding a different and added dimension to the issues that need to be considered. But I'm confident that what we have in place, what we will put in place, will be as good as we can make it, and that we are able to be responsive to issues that will inevitably present themselves that we can't anticipate at this stage.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. I have a couple of questions, but I'll open it up to members first, actually. I've got Councillor Naeem and then Councillor Press.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. That's been very helpful. Obviously, we want to see a sort of a COVID-free kind of election process where we don't want to see a spike afterwards. My worry is the fact that we've got more things to do as a result of the situation that we're in. Has the government given us any more resources to tackle these kind of challenges that are going to come our way?
Yes, there's been an indication that inevitably there will be further expense that's incurred as a result of the measures that we have to put in place, and the government has indicated that we need to note what those expenses are and submit them in the normal way. So yes, is the short answer.
Councillor Press.
Yeah, I'm wondering about will the counting staff have PPE, given that they're going to be counting thousands of votes, and when people go into polling, I'm just wondering about the logistics. You've got polling, you've got council staff counting thousands of votes where people have been touching a piece of paper. Will they be? Presumably, it won't be just masks. Will they have PPE?
As you can imagine, we need to work very closely with our public health colleagues about exactly that issue, about the contact with polling slips, voting slips. That is still being looked at, Councillor, and advice being sought on exactly what provision we will provide and what steps will be taken to minimise any risk that might arise from coming into contact with numerous, inevitably, bits of paper that will have to be touched and counted. So that will be properly thought through, and whatever steps are necessary will be put in place.
That's a very fair point, is that, Councillor Press? And I suppose at the end of the day, when people are actually, it's important that they count every slip that comes through. And to do that, a lot of the times people use the aid of the little rubber things on the finger to count them through. If they're having to wear gloves of any description, they may miss slips. I don't know, but it is a very good question, is that? So, okay. Any more members for questions? I am keeping an eye on the chat box as well. So if any members want to indicate through the chat box, they can do. Okay. With regards the postal votes as well, Ian, do we know roughly what the take-up's been so far? And if not, when we might have a good idea of what the take-up's going to be on people requesting the postal votes?
Yes, I mean, we have a healthy take-up in any event. In a normal cohort, we have a good percentage of people who opt for that. It's about 24%, I think. So it's too early to say yet what that final percentage will be. I think it's inevitable it will rise, just because it's a way of voting that was given some publicity in the American elections that were held in November, just because of the controversy that surrounded mail-in ballots, I think it's called over there. So it's taken on a profile. We have, as I said, raised that again with all of our voters to make them aware of the fact that it's something that they can opt into. Quite what the percentage will be through the course of the next month or so, we don't know, but it will rise, certainly.
I think that the difficulty with that as well, and putting party politics aside, I mean, I suppose if we have an idea, I don't know whether we're allowed to know this, but if the percentage of postal vote take-ups is quite high, then it gives us a better idea of how we campaign as well as councillors. Whether we'll be allowed to know that, I don't know. Ben, do you think we might have an idea of how the take-up's going?
Yeah, I'll check with Michelle and see when we might get a definitive figure on that. So yeah. And the other thing I should have mentioned, members, is the government has also indicated that it's relaxed the provision around proxy votes. So ordinarily, a proxy vote has to be applied for some time ahead of the polling day. We will be allowed to issue or allow a proxy vote. So if someone was to be self-isolating on the morning of the polling day, then they could contact us up to 5 p.m. on that day to indicate that they wish to vote via a proxy who they nominate. That's a significant relaxation in the rules around that, and is specifically designed for someone who, as I said, is either diagnosed and can't get out to vote, or has to self-isolate because of some other contact.
Okay. I've got Councillor Naeem indicating to come in. I think Councillor Dacre wants to comment as well on the postal vote. So I'll let Councillor Naeem come in at this point.
Just a thought about the actual result here. Is that going to affect the way the result is going to be announced? Is it like normally the next day, or will we have to wait a few days for the actual result because of the high take-up of postal votes, or because the system is going to be different? Do we have an indication of what is going to be in terms of the result? Is it going to be announced the next day, or is there going to be a time limit?
It's likely that the voting will take place for the local elections the following day. That's the Friday. I don't think the number of postal votes would cause that to be delayed any further. They have to be counted with the votes cast at the polling stations, but we wouldn't anticipate that the volume of those postal votes would cause us a problem, to be honest.
Okay. Councillor Dacre, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. It was just a comment really arising from experience campaigning, which is that generally speaking, when we've been campaigning, we seem to get pretty real-time information on how many postal votes, who's been applying for postal votes. So I'm sure that will be available very quickly to us. It somehow gets put into our contact creator system or something, I think. So I'm pretty sure that political parties will have access to that information very early on, for precisely the reasons you say. We need to know who's likely to postally vote, not waste energy on them after they've already voted.
I suppose it's difficult when we can't actually go out and knock on doors as well this year, which is how we usually gather a lot of our information as, you know, as members, I suppose. Councillor Porritt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian, for the update. It's interesting, and I guess there's quite a lot of still unknown unknowns. I was just wondering about the people the members of the public who help us make the election possible. So that is the poll clerks and the election staff and the counting staff and so on. Have we got any concerns about people not wanting to do that? I mean, I know, for example, my parents would usually be poll clerks where they live, but they're certainly not planning to take themselves out into the public realm just yet. And whether, you know, there's a lot of people in the older age range who traditionally get involved in the process, and whether there were any concerns about whether we were going to be able to cover all those posts.
We have gone out, as you'd expect, with a request for those who we would normally contact to indicate whether they were content to be involved in the election process this time. And we are comfortable that we have sufficient numbers to provide us with the poll clerks, returning officers, and counting staff. So that is something that we are comfortable with. We will also try and ensure that any households who normally work together, such as husband and wife or partners within the same household, are also then included in the same polling bubble, effectively, so that we'll try and ensure that there is as much of that taking place as possible. So staffing is okay. We did go out very early on that, and we're confident that we'll have enough numbers to provide us with.
We have sufficient cover if any of those people were suddenly needing to self-isolate or diagnosed or so on at short notice. Exactly.
Yes, even on the day, hopefully we'll have 3 people rather than the 2 we normally have. So yeah, we should be fine as far as that's concerned. Fingers crossed.
Okay, Councillor Press.
Sorry if will councillors be able to go to the count as normal? Yeah.
Yes, they will. Yeah.
Oh, great. Right.
Okay. Will that be limited though to numbers, Ian? Because usually we're allowed about 4 or something like that.
No, there's been no relaxation of those regulations, so we have to still comply with the requirement on those who are entitled to go. Mm-hmm. Again, North Bridge is a large venue, and we are planning for the numbers that we would anticipate to arrive because of those regulations, and we'll hopefully have in place a system to accommodate all those people in safely. It will require, and I'll say this at this stage, it will require cooperation from prospective candidates, agents, and existing members who are restanding. But that is something that obviously is required of us all in various situations that we all find ourselves in. So it's no different as far as that's concerned. Masks, etc., will still be required.
Okay. I should imagine, I mean, I'm thinking here that the use of North Bridge, if it's not been used for sporting activities, then we do have other halls within that building that I suppose could be utilised rather than the one main hall.
We will be doing that inevitably because we have, as I said, the parish and town council elections and the combined authority elections. So there will be, and there always are, more than just the main hall room used for the various processes to bring the vote into the count halls. So yeah, there's a full assessment done of as many of those rooms as possible that we can use.
Okay. And then just briefly going back to the schools, Ian. Do we know which schools these are that will not be used? Because I mean, I don't know how we're fixed in Stainland, but I certainly know that a certain part of my ward, where we have the Bowling Green School, the only other building that we could publicly use is probably the library, which is a lot smaller. I mean,
we do know all of that, Councillor. We have a list. I can't recall off the top of my head the various venues being used across the borough, but I'm sure that there'll be more information given about that on Monday.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, any more questions from members? No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate the update on that. It has clarified things a lot for us, and we'll look forward to the all-member briefing next week.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, Councillor Gallagher.
Good evening all. I'd just like to make my apologies for being late. I was having some technical issues and I was a little at home a little later than what I anticipated. So apologies for being late.
Not a problem. You're welcome. Right. Okay, moving on to our next item, which is the revenue monitoring report. Let me just bring up this. So it's the final overall revenue monitoring position for 2021. The forecast service and essential control variances, and the estimated impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So Nigel, this is over to you. I'd just like to say, and I mentioned this earlier on this afternoon to Mike and Lauren, that it was quite a good report. It's quite well put together and quite easy to read compared to some of the reports we've had in the past. So whether it's a different person that's put this report together, but it was quite, it sounds a bit sad this, but it was actually quite pleasurable reading this particular report. So not usually we say things like that about finance reports, but Nigel, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. You've probably just ruined my first line, which was going to be, you'll be familiar with the usual format of this report. But in terms of what the report says, as you quite rightly point out, it's the third and final revenue monitor for the current financial year. But the approach we've taken is the same as previous reports, which is trying to strip out all the implications of the pandemic to understand what the position is behind all that. But in terms of the COVID funding, one of the good things about the report is that it says that at this stage, we anticipate that there will be sufficient funding in the current year to meet the additional costs being incurred by the council in this year. And that based on the current information, that we expect there'll be about £3.1 million worth of COVID funding to carry forward. Now, clearly that position can change, but that's as it stands at the moment. And my hopefully clear advice within the report is that if there is a surplus funding this year, it should be carried forward into next year to address some of the risk that we will still have, in particular around additional costs. And I think I mentioned the report on social care in particular, and the loss of income, and again in particular around sports and parking services, where the government has kept the income compensation scheme in place until the end of June. What we're not sure is whether that will then end and there's nothing after that. But clearly, again, there's some uncertainty given that the income levels for, in particular, those two services, we wouldn't expect to return to normal levels in July or any time soon after that. So there's a good element of risk within next year, which hopefully, if we have any surplus funds to carry forward into next year, will help manage those. Once you strip all those COVID costs and income streams out, then the underlying position Looks as though there are budget pressures of still just over £900,000 across directorates. But what directorates are saying at the moment is they think, due to the action that they're taking during the year and for the remainder of this year, that they can manage those down, and all directorates are hoping to still break even against their budgets by year end, which is a kind of positive position, particularly in relation to earlier monitoring reports. Still a lot of work to do to be able to achieve that. But if we can achieve that, that would mean that there would be no call on additional call on reserves at the year end, which is something again that I've highlighted in previous reports, that if possible, then I would like us to either maintain existing reserves or preferably grow those reserves if possible, but clearly that's difficult. So based on that, as I say, all directors are saying at the moment that we hope to be able to manage those pressures in the current year. And on that note, I'll rather than go on and go through the detail of the report, I'll probably just invite questions if that's okay.
Of course, yeah, no problem at all. Members, any questions? Councillor Porritt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nigel. I should have to reiterate Councillor Bellinger's comments about it being like an easier read this time. I don't know, perhaps I'm getting used to reading them. We've seen before the pressures on legal recruitment and retention, and I see it, obviously it's still there. And I wondered if you knew how far along we were in terms of addressing that. Obviously it says that it's being addressed, but I just wondered how that's going and how realistic that's going to be to bring it back under control.
I think if Ian's still hopefully on the call, he might be able to give a kind of more detailed response to that.
Yes, happy to, Nigel, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to say that we are making progress, specifically in the childcare legal team. We are close to being staffed with full-time permanent members of staff as opposed to locums. I spoke with my principal solicitor just yesterday, and there is a remaining recruitment around adult social services. But apart from that, we are better placed as far as full-time permanent members of staff than we have been for some time. Having said that, we're bound perhaps to get a change to that position tomorrow, I mean, having made that comment. But yeah, it's been an issue for us. There's no getting away from that. And the cost of locums is a concern. One of the issues that I've explained in the past about the small but very good legal team that we have is that we are reliant on specialisms. And if we lose a member of staff either through illness or through departure to another authority, then that does leave us with the need to bring someone in quickly to fill that, because it's not easy for someone to step across into that area. And that's the way that local government legal teams, unfortunately, across the board have developed of late. So yes, we're better than we have been. I try to keep a very careful eye on any requests for locums and try and manage it through if at all possible. It's not always capable of doing that. We have been as busy as we've ever been in legal, as in many other areas of the council, with, as you can imagine, the added issues that present through the recent 12 months of dealing with contracts and provision of services across the council.
Okay, thank you, Ian, for your response on that. I've got Councillor Naeem, and then I've got Councillor Press.
Thank you, Chair. I think on what Ian was saying in terms of recruitment and retention, there is an issue about the policy that we've got about when we say management actions on making savings. It generally means that when a post becomes vacant, we don't fill it, so we save money. But I think from what Ian's still saying is, because the demand is getting a little bit more, we're now going for locums or agency staff, which defeats the whole thing, doesn't it, really? Because we're spending more on locums and agency staff with the policy that we've got about savings. How much is that actually affecting? I mean, how much is the policy affecting this kind of situation that we're in at the moment? Because recruitment retention, particularly in the legal sector, has always been a concern, you know, because the demand is there, but we can't seem to fill in the posts that we need.
Councillor, if I can just respond on that first point about it, I don't think it is a policy that we don't backfill vacancies when they arise. Yes, of course, there is the need. It presents an opportunity to look at a service area to say, right, is there an opportunity for doing something different because it's now presented to us if someone has left, and we obviously do consider that. But if there's a business case, business case that's made for there to be a straight replacement of the person who's left, and that is something that happens. The issue, particularly in legal sometimes, is that filling the vacancy is not always as straightforward as you might expect, because certain aspects of legal services, childcare in particular, it's very, very hard to get lawyers to apply. There's a market out there where they know they're in demand, and increasingly people have moved to the locum situation because they know that they are in demand and can therefore be fairly secure about moving from one locum position to the next. So yeah, we are looking to try and address that through various ways of trying to perhaps overstaff in a particular area, but it's difficult to anticipate where the next vacancy might arise. You can see Nigel's indicating as well.
Nigel indicating. Yeah, if you want to come back in.
Yeah, it's just on the same point as Ian was really making there, that where there is a vacancy, the first question that's asked is, do we need to fill it? Do we need to fill it on a different basis? Can we operate that service in a different way? But once that decision's made, then we go to recruitment. The use of agency staff and locums is limited really to where we haven't been able to fill a vacancy for whatever reason, and then it should be on a short-term basis anyway, or there's an urgent need pending a recruitment process. So that's when we tend to use agency, on the assumption that agency staff will generally be more expensive than employing someone directly. And therefore it should be limited to, as I say, where there's an urgent need, where we can't fill a post immediately, or whether there's some kind of specialism that we require on a short-term basis within the council. So those would really be the criteria. But in terms of keeping posts vacant, in terms of management action, it would normally just be that case of every time there's a vacancy, we will just question, do we need to fill it on a like-for-like basis, or do we do something slightly different?
Yeah, I just raised that because in the past, when we have asked what does it mean in terms of management action, I think the first point that comes in is either we actually sort of, don't sort of renew that post, or freeze the post for a while, or take the savings to the next year. So those are the two kind of options that are coming forward. And then when we sort of are told, then again, in terms of the costs are more when we have to sort of get people on a short-term basis. I just think we need to sort of be clear about that. So I understand what you're sort of saying, but it's just saying from past experience, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Managers to say, oh yes, we would think about freezing the posts, and I just thought to address that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Press.
I just wanted to focus really on the income issue, i.e. the income which hasn't been coming in now for a year, on parking, on theatres, on council tax, actually, because less people are paying the full council tax. It's the report talks repeatedly about fluidity and uncertainty, and And of course, on Monday, the Prime Minister set out a roadmap out of lockdown, which a lot of people felt was rather a longer road than they'd anticipated. And was also the fact, I was talking to some people locally about plans for a book festival. And it seems to me to be already clear that even when even let's say in the worst case scenario, the restrictions were lifted in June, a lot of people are still going to be unwilling to go back to normal, to do what they would have done, to go into town, to visit Shipton Hall, all that kind of thing. So much of this is uncertain, and I realise that nobody can really know. But I wondered if there'd been, various modelling done. I'm sure there must have been various modelling done as to how this revenue income can start to build, and have you worked it on different scenarios? Nigel, this is probably a question for Nigel, really. I mean, do you have a series of different scenarios which you work on to kind of, assess what's likely and not likely to happen?
I think in terms of in the developing the medium-term financial strategy, we looked at those scenarios and what is a reasonable expectation about income coming back. I've got to say, I mean, you mentioned the words uncertainty, etc. There, it is very difficult. What we kind of put up in the medium-term financial strategy in the end is we said, well, we know that there's going to be the government's income compensation scheme for the first 3 months, whereby we can get back 75% of the income losses. And within the MTFS, we allocated £1 million as another amount of income loss on top of that, if you like. So that's the amount we've provided for, which probably would say across the year that assumes that we might lose, say, 1/3 of our income. Now, whether that will bear out is really unknown, because, as I say, if things come back to normality or restrictions are released in June, that doesn't necessarily mean that the parking income will come back to normal. If the sports centres are open by then the number of actual users will probably be significantly less than it was before, just because of the safety precautions there. So we've made a kind of a best estimate, if you like, of the income losses, but it's really those two areas, parking and sports, where there's effectively £10 million worth of income to the council between those two services. And you can see how relatively small variations in our assumptions could make quite big differences. And it goes back to my previous point about, if we have any resource to carry forward, then it gives us some protection against whatever happens in terms of those income streams in the future. And I've no doubt we'll be looking at this again come next October as we do a revised medium-term financial strategy, and saying, well, based on what we know now, do we have to even look at our income budgets on a permanent basis and rebase them? In the ideal world, would have done it for 21-22, but I really wouldn't want to guess what those baseline budgets might be for income for the future. So we've kind of hit upon a temporary solution for this coming year, and then we'll have to review it again in October based on how things are going then.
Because we all thought things would go back to I can't see things going back to normal as we thought they would initially. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Press. One of the things that I picked up on as well, and that's 5.3 and 5.3.2, the all age disability and mental health services. And obviously now that these are now a joint service, and therefore the budget's actually bigger. What's been done to address the overspend in the all age disability service? I mean, this is something that's, there's been an overspend in this for quite some time now. It's quite a large overspend. What sort of actions are taking place to address these overspends?
There are some specific actions within all age disability in terms of looking at and reviewing all the cases. I'll making sure that we review those on a regular basis to make sure that actually people get what they need in terms of care, but also that, as I say, that it's reviewed regularly so that those packages are right for people, but also right for the council. So there's that specific aspect within all age disability, but I think there's an understanding of as well that some of these costs are not going to be resolved directly, and that within adult services there are various other things, actions that are being taken to address it across the whole of the directorate. So you'll see examples around care charges, you'll see example around the way we deal with home care and things like that. That is trying to address it across the whole of the directorate, because I think there's a recognition that some of those budget pressures in all age disability will continue for some time. So that with the measures that adults in particular have put in place, we think we've got to a kind of reasonable baseline, which will need some shifting around of the budgets to make sure we've got enough in all age disability, but actually with the action that's been taken, we'll probably be moving it from other areas within adults social care. But again, this is an area where in particular we'll be looking at it very closely next year, because of as we come out of the pandemic, what will be the implications for care packages for people who've perhaps required had different needs during the pandemic from what they had previously, and whether that will continue or will it again revert back to the previous care requirements for individuals. So that's one of the key concerns, I think, plus the level of support we've had this year from the CCG, which won't necessarily be in place next year. So as I say, I think it's really those pressures in all age disability will continue. We will try to address them as best possible, but other actions within adult services will try and address it at the same time.
Okay. I mean, in the 5.3.3 as well, these areas along with proposed management actions, I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong, because I was looking at my notes when you were talking at one point, Nigel. What are some of these management actions that are actually taking place?
The management actions are really things that were agreed primarily in, I think it was in January last year. So within adult services, there was the proposals around Fernie-Lee residential. There were the proposals around home care and single people lifting, etc., personalised care. There were around care charges. Those were probably the ones off the top of my head. But we actually have regular sessions with the director of each directorate, budget challenge sessions, and go through to make sure that they're actually delivering on those actions, the ones that I've just referred to. Plus, if there are any variations, it's identifying what other actions might be necessary, which is why sometimes I say mid-year action is required in order to rebalance the books, because it's clear that some of the original plans can't be brought into place for various reasons. I mean, obviously this time round it's been the pandemic, but it's not always possible to implement exactly as was planned. So some of those examples there are quoted around adults, but there's quite a long list. The income levels are also being closely looked at in terms of ensuring that we recover everything that we can, and that's not just talking about clients, that's also about talking about people like the CCG as well, and making sure that we've got appropriate recompense from the CCG for their contributions towards care packages. But there's a whole host of a stream of things that we agree with the director to try and address the problem overall.
Yeah, I think it's quite important, that, isn't it, really, that we do get that support from the CCG. I mean, what we're finding now is with regards to patients being released from hospital as well earlier than they should, which means there's sometimes a bit of a time gap between them coming out of hospital and going into not their own personal, but actually going into care, into a care home, which means that between that time of them coming out early and going into a care home, they end up having to go back into the family home, which means care packages have to be put in place to it, for, you know, adaptations for them, which comes at quite a cost to us as an authority. You know, is there any way that we can be looking at, can this process be maybe speeded up? So if a person's due to come out of hospital at a certain time, that the care home itself is actually prepared for them as soon as they actually come out, which could potentially save us quite a lot of money from that gap in between.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of work going on about those processes in adult social care. There's a big review of processes that they're actually undertaking. Just on that point though, in terms of where people are discharged earlier from hospital at the moment, that's where the CCG are actually picking up the costs of those earlier discharges from hospital. I think one of the risks I was referring to is the fact that that income from the CCG isn't necessarily available next year. So if we continue that process of earlier release from hospital in order to kind of create the capacity within the hospitals, or at least release some of the pressures, if that income isn't there, then clearly those costs haven't got an income stream to go against them. So it's one of the big risks, along with income streams more generally next year, I think.
So it's something to look at, isn't it? Then, like I say, next year is that. Okay. Okay. Any more questions from members? I've another few questions myself that we've picked up through this report today. Okay. With regards CAFAM as well.
Perhaps before you go on, can I just deal with the issue about recruitment before we leave it too far behind?
Yes, of course. Yeah, not a problem at all, Councillor Day. Happy to come back to that.
Yeah. So I just wanted really to emphasise and confirm what Ian Hughes was saying about the fact that services are now, legal services are now so specialised, and really to emphasise that that is the way they have to be now, because legal work, like so much else, has become there's so much to know in any one field. It's unfair and dangerous, even potentially, to allow people to be working in fields in which they're not specialist. And of course, the other problem for the council is that many of the aspects of legal work that they deal with, for instance, children's services, you cannot wait for work to be done. Solicitors have to respond immediately to situations around risks to children. So you simply cannot wait until, if you lose a member of staff, you can't hang around waiting. You've really got no choice but to fill that post with a locum. So it's just to try for anybody out there watching to emphasise why it is that why we have to be, the lawyers have to be specialised, and why the council has to on occasion use those locums to fill in before you get a permanent member of staff.
I appreciate that, Councillor Dacre. One of the things I've found here is 5.7.1, which is largely through further saving on street lighting budgets, rates, revaluations and external funding. The Directorate's forecast on COVID-19 related overspending have been reduced from 1.2 million to 0.6 million. Proposed management action, including the one-off use of reserves, will reduce this to 40,000, which is quite a reduction. A minor variation on the net service control budget of 15.871 million. How is this actually being met? What is the management action plan to bring this figure down from that down to the 40,000? And obviously with the amount of reserves as well that's being put into that, what's the percentage of the reserves?
So the first point is that part of the reduction from £1.2 million is due to energy savings and rates in particular. So the energy savings are primarily due to the new street lighting arrangements, We haven't necessarily started paying off all the capital yet. So what we've got is some of the benefits of that in terms of the energy savings up front, because as soon as those street lights are replaced, then we start to generate the energy savings. So that's earlier than planned, in effect. The rate revaluations is really because there's quite actually a major exercise going on about the rating of buildings at the moment, where clearly, given the current circumstances, the economic circumstances, a lot of businesses are actually challenging their valuations, and the valuation office are looking at those, and I think it's fair to say that most of them are going down rather than upwards. In our case, some of our buildings have been revalued downwards, and therefore that's of some benefit to the council. So those are the things which we're taking some action to try and address the overspend within regeneration and strategy. After that, the directorate had some reserves remaining, and I think that's virtually the last of them, which you will use to get down to a break-even position. That's not sustainable. So what we've done for next year is there was some money left in the medium-term financial strategy to tackle some savings that are no longer deliverable. So the ones I've mentioned previously are around the income from commercial property investment, which the council can't borrow to do anymore. So there's an income target for that, which is no longer possible. And the other one was around new homes bonus, which is being phased out as a scheme. And in fact, I think there's only 1 year left of that. So again, the saving from new homes bonus can't be generated due to changes in legislation. So we've accommodated those within the medium-term financial strategy and said that those savings aren't possible anymore. So we need to remove them. And we made provision for those. So that's part of how the underlying pressures will be dealt with next year. Plus, again, some of the savings that regeneration and strategy are bringing forward themselves, some of which were included within the budget, but action that they're taking within the year to try and bring down the additional costs and meet some of the income targets. And in particular, the one around, because of the size of the capital programme, are the ways that we can actually make the most efficient use of charging against those capital schemes as well. So it's a combination of all those things, but the way that we've got down, or the directorate's got down to a break-even position, part of it is not sustainable, and which is why we've had to address it within the budget process.
Right, no problem. One of the things there was regards to the new homes bonus. Now, this may actually be a question for Cabinet, but I think whilst you're here and whilst Ian Hughes is here, I'm going to make the most of this. With regards to the local plan, okay, most of a good percentage of the local plan has been agreed on, and we're happy for certain areas to be developed on. Could this not be something that could be started on now on those areas to generate that income through the new homes bonus and council tax? And obviously the areas of the local plan that need to be finalised can be done later. Is it legally allowed?
Sorry, Councillor, if I think the question you're asking, if I'm understanding correctly, is that could a planning application go in for a piece of land in the borough that is earmarked to be in the local plan, but currently maybe sits with a different planning policy around it at the moment? Is that the question?
Yeah, it's sort of, yeah. It's obviously we've got the local plan, and there's certain areas within the local plan that we're happy with, certain areas for development. But obviously at this moment in time, we seem to be waiting for the whole of the local plan to be finalised before we actually move ahead. Now, obviously, one of the biggest things at the moment that we're behind on is house building, which is the new homes bonus and obviously council tax on the new properties. Are we not in a position where we could make a start on the development of some of these areas, make a start on the local plan to get some of these houses started on?
I mean, if there is an area within the borough where there is currently a parcel of land that is being looked at by a developer, then it can still be submitted for a planning application. We're not in a period where there's a moratorium on applications that come into the council, and obviously we are reliant on developers who wish to develop parcels of land. What is proposed within the local plan is obviously a redesignation of some areas, and that will have to wait for the local plan to be adopted, because the distinction, the change that will take place around those areas will allow applications to be submitted. So yeah, there are some areas where that will have to wait. There are still some parcels of land and areas in the borough that can be subject to a planning application right at this moment, and that is an issue that we will look to encourage developers to continue to do.
Like I say, it's probably a question to put to Cabinet as well, but I thought whilst we're on the finances and loans bonus, I thought I'd raise it at this particular meeting as well. So, okay, never mind. Moving on from that one. I don't think I have any more questions, unless members have any more questions on the revenue monitoring report. No.
I think Councillor Dacre wanted to comment on the discussion that was just happening.
Yeah, Councillor Dacre.
Yeah, thank you all. I was just going to say that even if a developer came forward now and applied for planning permission and it was granted in the fastest time available, I'm not sure that would necessarily impact on the last year of new homes bonus. So I think there'd be probably a limited amount that could possibly apply to, but I don't know the precise details of the new homes bonus. But
no, I think it was just a case of trying to speed the process up, really, rather than waiting any longer. I think, really, and if that process could be speeded up. Nigel?
I think what Councillor Dacre's just said is correct, that it is now too late to have any impact upon new homes bonus in the future. Next year is effectively the last year. Now, it may be replaced by something else in the future, but we don't know what that is yet. Right. Clearly, any new home that's built within the borough brings in council tax revenues anyway.
Yeah.
So there's still that financial incentive there, but not necessarily the new homes bonus, which effectively doubled up the council tax income to the council. As I say, whether it will be replaced by something else has been discussed, I think, nationally. But at this stage, I don't think there's a scheme being decided upon.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you. Right, okay, if no more questions on this, we'll move on to the capital monitoring report, which is item 7. I'll just scroll down and just get to this. Okay. Right. The purpose of the report is to provide details of the forecast capital programme for the period of 2020-2021 to 2022-23, and to provide an update on the delivery of schemes in the capital programme. Again, quite an interesting report, Nigel. I enjoyed reading this one as well, funnily enough. So, and again...
Thank you. Just in very brief summary then, Chair, I suppose the headline is that in the report that the capital programme over that 3-year period has increased from 117.6 million in the previous monitor to 166.7 million in this current monitor. Before anybody thinks that relates to any overspends, can I be quite clear that it doesn't? It's actually additional amounts that have been put into the capital programme, primarily or almost entirely on the Transport Fund and Transforming City programme, which are fully funded by or through West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The approach that we take generally is that we don't recognise or bring something into the capital programme until it's been approved through the Combined Authority. We don't second guess what's going to be approved, even though it may well be that it's being discussed there. we only bring it in when it's been approved. So those approvals have been received, mainly in relation to actually 22-23 financial year. But you can see that the capital programme over that 3-year period has gone up by nearly 50 million. But as I say, funded entirely by grants. So in terms of the overall programme now of 166 million, 3/4 of that, 76%, is actually funded by government grant of some form. So 126 million out of the 166 is actually funded by grant. The next largest element, 21%, is the borrowing, prudential borrowing of 34 million pounds. So that hasn't changed. It's really just reflecting what's been agreed over the whole period of time over the last few years, including some of the big schemes that are referred to within the report, whether that's street lighting, Northgate, etc. The programme itself balances out in terms of the spend and the resources funded by that grant and borrowing. Apart from, it relies upon 4.2 million pounds of what's referred to in the report as pooled resources. Actually, that means capital receipts from sale of assets. We've got 1.2 million pounds of that in the bag. The other 3 million pound is to be delivered over the next 3 years by the sale of assets, and there's a list within the report that would deliver that amount. Clearly, if the amount that was estimated from those sales varies at all, then either we will be looking at other capital receipts that we can generate, or we would adjust the capital programme. But as it is at the moment, that capital programme balances with the amount of expenditure that's planned and the amount of income that's available to fund it. But again, I'll pause there and just invite comments and questions if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Nigel. Councillor Press? You're on mute, Councillor Press. You're still on mute, Councillor Press.
Please don't stress me out by telling me I'm on mute when I know I'm on mute and I'm just unmuting. So I know, it just takes 10 seconds. So you'll have to bear with me. It normally takes, because I'm doing it from my PC and it just takes 10 seconds.
Right.
Okay, no, no, it's all right. You were trying to help. It's fine. No, I just wanted to say that my comment is really only that it's often the case that the highest profile capital schemes, get the headlines and all the rest of it. But I think it's just worth noting that, there's some really worthwhile stuff going on here, like the money that's in there for the Mixenden hub. I know we've had to cut that back a bit because because the financial situation has changed, but it's still in there. Money for extra care housing, the stuff that's going on at Beach Hill. So if you actually drill down away from the big, what do you call it, the big ticket stuff, I just think that it's I wish that people out there kind of understood, and I know it's hard because I'm not sure I understood it before I became a councillor, the difference between capital budgets and the revenue budgets. It's a totally different ball game, and I think perhaps one of the priorities we have as a council, and I know we try and explain it all the time, but it just, if we could only get out to people the difference and why we're able to make a difference. We're able to make a difference with the capital programme, and yet we face financial challenges with the revenue budget. It's complicated and tricky, and I'm probably just explaining myself very well. But there's a lot in here to be really positive about, is I think what I'm trying to say, and I'm glad to see that the smaller projects are in there as well as the stuff that we seem to spend a lot of time discussing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Press. One of the things I've picked up on this afternoon, and that is the list of projects. I'm just trying to bring the appendix up now in front of me. Let's see if I find it anyway. Are there any of those projects that you think might not come in on time and on budget? Bring it all back up again. There we go. Apologies, it's just taking some time. There we go. It's appendix, page 9, page 10. So obviously there's quite, there's quite a list of regeneration and strategy. The projects down there, the 134,342. So yeah, how do we monitor them to make sure that they're all going to come in on time and on budget? And are there any there that you think might just worry you a little bit, Nigel?
In terms of how we monitor it, obviously this part, the formal report, is the end of the process. Each individual project will have an arrangement in place in terms of either project board or something to be able to actually monitor in some detail. Most of the transport fund schemes, or all of the transport fund schemes, for example, there is an officer board that meets on a regular basis to actually look at all that information about the transport fund schemes to see that A, they're going to be delivered on time, and B, that they're going to be delivered to budget. And if they're not, then what action do we need to take, whether that's going back to Wicker for some reason, but ensuring that we actually are working within the resources and the timelines that we've got. So the monitor reflects, as we are at the moment, our current understanding of the timelines. Some of the transport fund schemes in particular are difficult to estimate the timelines because they might, for example, include purchase of land, which clearly is a process that can either be relatively quick, but more often than not can be quite lengthy. So some things are outside our control, but they are all monitored. And what we then do is each monitor is update that information if we think there's any slippage. Now, hopefully, and this is again as part of the process, we have to check that the timelines and any slippage in that actually fits with the resources available. So in other words, that we're not going to lose any resource, any grant as a result of any delays. So we have to be conscious of that as well. But all that process will do is look through those and say, if there is any delay, then are the resources still available to be able to cope with that? Okay, it's not ideal, but to make sure that we can still fund it. And you'll see that, for example, last year we had £11 million worth of capital funding that we rolled forward into this year, where there were some delays on schemes, but the money rolled forward to be able to complete those schemes, clearly just a little bit later than anticipated, but still be able to complete them. In terms of the cost side of that, again, we monitor those. I've got to say that at this stage that I don't anticipate any overspends against those schemes. That's not based on any particular knowledge, other than the fact that if there is a scheme that's having problems within its budget, then we have to go back to Cabinet and Council for approval for that. So there shouldn't be anything within the programme at the moment that's not funded and has got approval. In fact, there isn't anything in the programme at the moment that hasn't got that approval in place. If we spot any signs of potential overspends, then that requires a further report. Obviously, there's some flexibility in things like the transport fund schemes to via between different elements of schemes, but where the standalone projects, then it would require a further report. And as you've seen over the past few years, on occasions, reports have had to come back to Cabinet and Council. But as it is at the moment, the capital programme is fully funded, and we are not anticipating any overspends.
Okay. So have we actually learned from previous programmes in the past to manage the risk then of the current programmes?
Yes, there have been various presentations to Audit Committee in particular about the revised project management arrangements that are in place to ensure that where we have lessons to learn from projects in the past, that we apply that to current and future projects to make sure that, you know, if there's a risk, then we need to build that into both the budget and the timelines to ensure that we try and cover off that risk as best we can. There's always a balance there that what you don't want to do is put the project into a position where it's totally unviable because you built so much contingency and risk into it. But equally, you don't want to be in a position about having to come back to council to ask for further approval. So we do kind of have regular lessons learned exercises from previous projects to think, okay, we're starting a new project that might be similar, but or have similar principles, similar issues to something else. How can we apply learning to that and do something about it to try and ensure wherever possible that the same issues don't arise?
Right. But I say it's about increasing those contingencies, isn't it, really, within projects? Like I say, which we'll learn from places like the PSOL, really, I suppose, and having those contingencies or those higher contingencies in place, at least it covers us then if something does actually happen. And at the end, if we get through it without needing to, you know, use that money, at least it can then go to something else. Members, any questions on this report for Nigel? No, very quiet. Councillor Dacre, I don't know if you want to say anything on this particular report.
Nothing specific. I think some of the points I would have wanted to bring to your attention have been made by Nigel already, particularly in relation to the new project management process that they're going to have, which should be much more all-encompassing and streamlining and rationalising the way in which all projects are managed, so they're managed in a similar way. But really, I think the capital monitor, I think, just demonstrates that the council's got ambitious plans for the borough. We've seen the fruits of some of that already with the sixth form centre open, and the LED lighting project is now bearing fruit in terms of reduced energy costs. And as you've heard from Nigel, I don't know whether he gave the percentage, but 76% of our capital projects come from grants, so it's not costing us anything in terms of borrowing. But nevertheless, also just to emphasise that where we do borrow to invest, we do so on a sustainable basis.
I think that's always good to know, that, isn't it, really? So, okay, I don't think I have anything else to add. No, I don't think there's any members indicating to ask any more questions. So on that, I appreciate those reports, very good reports. And I think we're actually doing, I'd say we're doing relatively well, considering what we're going through. I don't think the usual question to you, Nigel, is there anything keeping you awake at night? If there is,
plenty of things. Nothing I'd admit to on this. Yes,
I think if there was, I think we'd know about it, and that's one of the good things with this council and people like yourself, officers like you do tell us if there is any issues.
I think if I may, Chair, there, yes. I mean, what we do try to pull out in all these reports is not just the figures in terms of where we are, but try and highlight any particular risks as well. So when as I say, joking apart, in terms of the things that might keep me awake, then we do try and reflect those within the report. You know, the risks I've referred to this evening in terms of the position next year on income and social care costs and so on. So those are the kind of things that I will try and flag up in the reports to make sure that members are aware of them and not just me. Okay,
thank you. Could you please pass on my thanks to the officers who put these reports together? And honestly, I've looked at some reports now over the 5 years of being a councillor, and for some reason, I don't know if it's my eyesight that's improved, but these two particular reports have been a lot easier to take in. So please pass on my thanks.
Thank you, will do.
Okay.
Thank you. Helen.
Right. Thank you, Ian, as well. Moving on to item number 8, which is the work programme for 2020-2021. Okay, and Lauren, this is usually over to you.
Yeah, no problem. Just to say that the last scheduled meeting will be the 24th of March, and we've got a couple of HR items on that agenda. So Jackie's coming to do a bit of an update because I think it's a while since you last had one, and also to include some of the COVID stuff that she did last time. She's also coming to report back on the progress of the diversity in the workplace review that Councillor Naeem was involved in.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And we also have Debbie Gaunt coming regarding the progress on procurement and social value. So if there is any changes, as always, if you just let us know or anything you want to build in, and we can see what we can do for that last meeting. Yeah. Okay.
No problem. And I think it might be worth mentioning as well. I know I've seen the email very last minute as well this evening. This will probably go to Councillor Robinson's place scrutiny board with regards the planning issues that was sort of like raised to me, and the lack of resources within planning compared to what they used to be. So I'm glad that that's been picked up by place scrutiny board, and you know, I'd like to be involved in that meeting as well if I can. I'll come along to that meeting, Councillor Robinson, to put some of my comments across and be involved. So is there anything else that any members think there's anything that we could look at or need to add to the work plan? Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add that there's a piece of work on green spaces, which is sort of shared between place and strategy and performance, and
yes,
it's scrutiny in half a day, I guess, on the 10th of March. And I think we've got a great cast lined up for you. There's lots of people interested to come and discuss the various aspects of both managing and community involvement in managing green spaces and the health benefits of green spaces. So for those of you that are involved, I think it'll be a good session. And for anybody who isn't directly involved, there's still room to get involved or to come and observe.
Yeah,
thank you.
I must admit, I'm quite impressed with what's been put together so far on that. In such a short space of time, there's been a lot of work involved. So it's quite interesting to see what's happened so far. I think Andrew's team's doing a remarkable job.
I think I may say so. A lot of that's down to Lauren.
And down to Lauren as well. So thank you, Lauren. So yeah, I think we've got some more spaces on there, haven't we, for other members if they want to join. So if any members are interested in coming on board on that, you're more than welcome to join us. It's quite an interesting piece of work, really. So, right. Other than that, there is nothing else. So therefore, our meeting's over.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you, everybody.